Hello, book people. PT Hilton here with another edition of the Dream Read Along. Today we are on the second volume, The Doll's House, which is Sandman number 9 through 16. One of the longest collections that we're going to look at. I think maybe the Kindly ones is longer, but congratulations if you made it through this week. There's a lot to read in a week, but we made it through, so let's talk about it. And it really is, to me, the point where Sandman starts becoming what I think of as Sandman. It's got so many of those different elements that make this comic series special. It's got the weird little kind of seemingly standalone stories that add a lot to the overall theme. It's got Morpheus in all his failings and his glories. It's got the really quirky, great human characters and the quirky, great characters from the Dreaming. So there's a lot going on here. Let's get into it. So we see the story of Nada, the character that we saw in Hell in one of the previous issues, condemned there by Morpheus. And in this one, we learned a little bit more about why maybe she is condemned, and it's framed in a really interesting way in the whole idea being that there's this culture that when a young boy kind of reaches the age of manhood in their estimation, they take him out into this area and tell him this story. It's a great opening in that, first of all, of course, it reveals a lot about Morpheus and how petty and spiteful in a way he can be. It really does not come off well in that tale. But it also says a lot about stories and our relationship with stories, which I think is really the theme of this whole volume, is the way that people relate to stories and the way that Morpheus, as kind of a representation of dreams or stories, relates to humans. Those two, the relationship between those two things, is really central to this. But one thing I want to point out in this first issue that I thought was interesting, in comic books as a form, when you're looking at them, one of the amazing things that it can do that most other mediums cannot is play with like the format of the page a lot more than, and try to use that to say something more than other mediums. I mean, you can do it in movies, you can do it in books, but it calls attention to itself a little bit more. In comic books, you have the option of composing each individual shot, but also composing the way those shots are arranged on a page to say something. And in this one, I think we really see basically all the pages in the story are laid out similarly, where the top rows are the story itself, and then the bottom row underneath the story is the storytellers. So like the whole story is like that. If you look through, you'll notice the bottom two panels on each, or the bottom panel on each page, is the storytellers talking. And I think the main thing it does is it shows the teller's respect for story. One way to look at it is, you think about like in cartoons and stuff like that, whenever someone's dreaming, a lot of times it'll be like shown as being above their head, like in a little cloud. But another thing is just that this society holds the story more important than themselves. They respect it so much they only tell it once in each lifetime, and it's just above them. So I love the way that's displayed on the page. Throughout this collection, we see a lot of examples of people who are not respecting stories. We have the examples of at the one point, Gilbert tells the story of kind of the original Red Riding Hood, the very, very violent and upsetting version of Red Riding Hood, and talks about how that story's been changed over the years. We have the references to, for a while, King Lear was changed to have a happy ending, and Dream says, don't worry about it. The true stories always go back to their original forms eventually. And then we also have like the serial killers who are kind of telling themselves a story about themselves, that there's some kind of misguided heroes, or there's some kind of anti-establishment kind of rebels. And of course we have Dream that kind of his punishment to them at the end of that whole serial convention is to kind of lift that story, take that story away from them, and make them look themselves in the eye. So we have a lot of examples of people not respecting stories and the negative consequences of that. Another great use of kind of the form in the page is when we first meet Rose Walker, our main human character in the story, and she goes into the dreaming, and as she goes into the dreaming, the page shifts and becomes sideways. I think that's a great representation of the dream world. And also that issue has one of my favorite breakings of the fourth wall ever, where Lucian and Morpheus look out of the panel and they're like, someone's watching us. I remember the first time I read that, I was like, wait, they're talking about me. They've seen me. Great breaking of the fourth wall. That's a tough thing to do in a unique way, and I love the effective way that they do it here. Other things to talk about. So we meet a couple of more of the endless. We meet Desire and we meet Despair. And Desire I think is really an important character in this, because not only because she sets the whole thing in motion, of course, and that Nada story is kind of the tale of the last time she messed with Morpheus, and this story is the next time she's messing with Morpheus. But I think really we kind of talked about people's relationships to stories. Dream's relationship to people is the other big part of this. So we saw in the last issue, before this section, Death, the way she relates to people. She's very hands-on. She takes her responsibilities very seriously, but she's hands-on. She goes out and she's like greeting the people as they die and taking them into death. We have that, and like embracing them. So she's very hands-on. On the other hand, we have Desire, who is also seems pretty hands-on, but kind of just considers humans playthings, and just for fun and her twisted entertainment, basically. On the other hand, we have Morpheus, Dream, who he takes his responsibilities very seriously, like Death, but he's very hands-off. Like, he creates these tools and puts his powers into them, and then he also creates all these dreams and kind of almost delegates a lot of his duties, it seems like, to dreams, to his creations. We're not seeing him go around at night and touch people's heads or anything like that to make them dream in the way that Death is. And if you think about it, really, in these first two volumes, a lot of the problems are caused by that whole thing that he has this distance between himself and humanity. In the first one, the problem was those tools that he put a bunch of his power into. He had to go gather them up, right? And in this volume, a lot of the problem is caused by his creations that he's delegated to. His dreams are out there. We've got the terrifying Corinthian out there that he created, and he has to hunt him down. Then we've got Glob and Brute out there that he has to hunt down. And then, of course, Fiddler Green, who is out there in a much more benevolent kind of way, helping Rose. But all the same, Fiddler Green is out there while Dream is not, and he kind of has to go and get involved. So I think that's really important. And I think a lot of that theme, if you look at it and break it down, can be kind of boiled down to one of my favorite issues, which of course is the Men of Good Fortune, which is the issue about the guy who basically just refuses to die. And Morpheus meets him every 100 years in this bar. And I love the way that starts with Death. That's almost like setting Morpheus up on this blind date with this, Morpheus is one of the Endless who kind of does not engage with humanity directly that much. And we have this guy who has kind of decided he's not going to engage with one of the Endless, Death. So they're kind of like a match set. They're both this very natural thing that is part of who they are. They're completely denying it. And so we see them meet and talk over time. We see Hob, the guy who denies death, change every 100 years. But the interesting thing is that we also see Morpheus change. We see, of course, his style of clothing changes with the times, which is reminding me a little bit of the way that the story Little Red Riding Hood has changed with the times, and even King Lear, the way that changes with the times. Morpheus himself is also changing to keep with the current styles and things like that. But the really interesting thing we see is, I think we do see in the most recent incarnation, the kind of current incarnation of Morpheus, when he goes and meets with Hob, that he's different. He's different than that guy who condemned Nada to hell for refusing to be with him. I think his time in captivity has changed him a bit. In the previous meeting with Hob, he freaked out at Hob's suggestion, the mere suggestion that Morpheus would be friends with a human or would need human companionship or friendship. When we see him now, he's a little more open to that and a little more, he's willing to be friends. So I think we're starting to see that Morpheus has changed somewhat, although he still hasn't rescued Nada from her eternal condemnation. So, he's got a ways to go still. So I think that's kind of the main thing in this is the kind of relationship between stories and the personification of stories, Dream, and humanity. And it's really interesting to see those two interact. I know I've talked about kind of high ideas and not a ton about the story, but the story itself is great too. I love the Corinthian, terrifying. I love that whole idea of the serial convention. I love Matthew. Matthew, by the way, has appeared before, I think in Swamp Thing. But I love the way he's presented here. Like, we just don't get any backstory. He's just, we get the idea that he is a kind of new to Dream, but we don't know any of his backstory. I love the way that the storytelling, the boldness of the storytelling, being like, I'm not going to give you a backstory. You get it. He's new to the dreaming. We also get the first indications of some of the other Endless. We get some talk about Poor Delirium, and we also get some talk about the Prodigal, and we see on Desire's wall that they have all the sigils. They're symbols of their station, but we also see a blank spot where this Prodigal apparently that person's symbol should be, but is missing. So we'll see a lot more about that. There's probably a million more things we could say about this. I haven't even gotten into too much about Rose and her whole story and all that. But I'm going to cut it off there, and I would love for the conversation to continue below. You know, this collection right here is getting into what I love about Sandman, and I love the big ideas it has, but also the very human way it shares those ideas. So that's my thoughts on Doll's House. We will come back next time to talk about Dream Country, which is probably the collection I've read the most in the Sandman series, and we'll talk about that more next time. Thank you so much for watching. Please, let's keep the conversation going below. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.